He wasn't supposed to find him. Ken Schrader's car was the closest of the four that crashed into each other on the last lap of the 2001 Daytona 500. He'll never forget what he saw through that window. He did interviews and filmed documentaries for 25 years but didn't say much about those few seconds. He answered all the questions that were close to the center, but not any that were in the middle. Many fans had their own ideas during the silence, but most of them were wrong. He has finally started to talk now that he is 71, not to get attention, not in order to get paid, because 25 years have passed since the man he is guarding was last seen, and some truths get heavier the longer you carry them by yourself. 4 times around. The cars came off of turn 2-1 last time in a tight, ugly pack. 5 of them were fighting over positions that didn't really matter anymore. Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr. were already ahead, running 1-2 and not being able to be caught. Their cars belonged to the man behind them. Waltrip had been in more than 460 races, but he had never won one. Today was going to be the day. Behind them, Ken Schrader, Dale Earnhardt, Sterling Marlin, and Rusty Wallace were all trying to get to the finish line without changing the outcome of the race. Everything else would change. As Schrader came off the backstretch, he pushed to the outside. He had raced with Earnhardt enough times to know that the move below never worked. It was pointless to lose speed when trying to pass him on the bottom. Earnhardt's black Chevrolet hit Marlin's car first, low on the track, and it shot up the bank and toward the wall. Schrader couldn't get out of the way because he was running the high Q at the wrong time. He hit Earnhardt's car from the outside and both of them hit the concrete barrier at full speed. It was hard to hear from the television booth. Compared to the last violent rolling wreck Daytona had made, this one looked like it could be survived. Of course, cars have been through much worse over the years, and for a moment, the broadcast focused on the party in the front, instead of the accident behind it. Schrader was the first to get out of the wreckage unharmed. He didn't check on himself first, though. Instead, he ran straight for the black number 3 car that was sitting against the wall, still smoking, and still settling on its suspension. He went up to the window and peered in. He hadn't seen or heard the driver he had known for 20 years. It wasn't the same man who had ridden shotgun with him on business trips and fought with him about fish deliveries. The guard didn't try to pull him out. He instead turned around and waved wildly at the medical staff. The wave said more than any words could have. He knew already. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Not that day, and not for a long time after that. Schrader wasn't a newbie when he was at that window. He had already spent almost 20 years in the sport's top series, making him one of the most durable and well-known drivers in the garage, someone who had raced against Earnhardt more times than either of them could likely remember. It was important. That meant the person on their knees next to the wreckage wasn't a stranger responding to a stranger's crash. It was someone who knew exactly what a quiet cabin at that speed meant before a doctor got there to confirm it. Who Schrader told first and what he knew. Rescuers circled car number 3, but the TV show only showed victory lane. Waltrip finally had his first win and Earnhardt Jr. came in second. Both of them were driving for the team, owned by the man who was trapped in the wreckage behind them. Waltrip should have had the best afternoon of his career. It turned into the event that no one who was there wanted to remember. Schrader didn't go to the interview pen. He only went to find one person. He found Waltrip still enjoying the moment while he was celebrating and pulled him and the noise. Those were not away from the cameras and the noise. Those were not the exact words he spoke aloud. But he did warn his friend that the news could be the worst it could be. Waltrip finished his winner's interview a few minutes later. He had no idea how fast the day was going to change. Before media could ask why, the meeting was cut short and he was taken away. Fans outside the speedway were already gathering in small groups before the track lights came on. They were waiting for an answer that no one wanted to hear. The doctors worked in the care center for almost an hour before the result was made public. The head of NASCAR told the media about it that night, and stock car racing lost the most untouchable hero it had ever had. Within days, his picture would be on the cover of Time magazine, and news stories about the crash would make the front pages of newspapers that had never written about auto racing before. From that point on, Schrader talked about what he saw through that window in every interview for the next 25 years. But he never actually described what he saw. Reporters asked him to fill in the blanks for years. We always talked about something safer when he was around. Going back to the races, let's go back to the numbers. Not that window at all. To understand why there was such a long pause, you need to remember how 2 very different guys, from 2 very different places, became cousins. A strange bond formed in a garage. In the 1980 seconds, Schrader moved to North Carolina to try to make it to the Cup Series. A driver from Missouri, who isn't part of one of the close-knit racing families that already rule the sport. He didn't belong in that world in any way that mattered. The 2 of them still found each other quickly. They were both building race shops within a few miles of each other near Mooresville around the same time. The competition began before either building had a roof. Earnhardt bet Schrader that his shop would be done before his was. He said his would be better, without a doubt. After a race at Bristol on a Monday morning, Earnhardt went to Schrader's house early, thinking he would win the bet right away. But Schrader was already there working before dawn. Earnhardt had to say that his own shop wasn't ready. That morning he had to drive on gravel just to get there. It was one of many stories the two men told each other over the years, little and clear. This is the kind of detail that only stays between people who liked each other. Earnhardt's original shop turned into the huge headquarters of Dale Earnhardt Incorporated over time, a building that was so big that people in the garage started calling it the Garage Mahal. But in the beginning, there were only two guys racing to finish building something that had nothing to do with trophies or point standings. They teased each other about gravel roads and built something that was not about winning trophies or points. In ways that no one outside their group saw, their closeness went beyond the racecourse. Earnhardt rode along with Schrader to look at the land before he bought it for his own home. Because he had lived in the country for decades, he knew just where to put the dam and how to build a pond on the land. He said he would bring the fish once the building was done. Schrader called to follow through on the promise when the pond was ready. The fish came the next week and was delivered with cash on delivery, which is something Schrader still brings up as proof that Earnhardt's kindness wasn't all good. The bet that turned into a fight. It wasn't always that easy when they talked. Schrader and Earnhardt both bought the same useless thing at a car show in Detroit, an amphicar. This is a weird little car that can drive on roads and float on water with the flip of a switch. They left the show, went all the way to the airport, and then turned around because they couldn't let go. Earnhardt gave a down payment in cash right then and there. Before anyone changed their mind, Schrader called his own shop and had a cashier's check and a rollback truck sent up to get it. One thing had to be done before Earnhardt would take the car. It was Schrader's job to make sure he was there when it went into the water. Schrader didn't pay attention to him at all and went ahead with it on his own as soon as he could. Earnhardt learned about it and was furious for as long as it took him to start arguing about something else, which was, of course, money. He never gave Schrader the last of his payment for the deal. That story almost had a follow-up. At that time, NASCAR's president and a longtime series official each owned a second amphicar. For a while, there was real, semi-serious talk of holding a race between the two cars on the lake inside the Daytona infield. Even though it didn't happen, the idea alone shows something about these guys when they weren't being filmed. There is something competitive about everything. Some things were never meant to be raced in the first place. People who were already adults and had won titles and built million-dollar businesses were still willing to fight over who threw a toy car into a lake first. The friendship was more than just between the two men. As soon as Schrader's 10-year-old daughter joined the Earnhardt family on their long trip on their yacht, she started to miss home more than either father thought she would. Earnhardt, not her dad, took her and put her on his lap. He talked her through it until she calmed down and started having fun. It was something she never forgot, and Schrader didn't either. Because they were so close, the story of the final race that had been going around for years never made sense to him. The story of blocking. Schrader doesn't want to accept. One story about Earnhardt's last laps was told over and over again in films and magazines about the race for 20 years. Until it became a legend. Most people think Earnhardt was on defense, holding back the pack so his son and his best driver could easily finish first and second without any pressure from behind. The story is clean. It fits the sweet finish that everyone wanted to write for him. Schrader says it's not right. He has been honest about it in a way that not many people close to Earnhardt have ever been. That day, Waltrip and Earnhardt Jr. didn't need to be protected because their cars were faster, and the winner was already chosen before the last lap. Earnhardt wasn't blocking out being kind to his son or his driver. He was blocking because even if he came in third place behind his own two cars, it would still be a good day for Dale Earnhardt Incorporated in terms of points, and Earnhardt never liked falling behind cars he owned. It's not as important as that difference seems. It changes the way we think about the last few minutes of his life from a heroic act to something more real, personal, and maybe even more honest. A man who raced the same way he always had, right up until the last corner he took. He wasn't trying to give his son a happy ending. He was after the same thing he had been after all his life. One more place. As the last finish went up, this one did too. Schrader saw the choice that put him on the outside line in the first place. The same line that he couldn't go on when Earnhardt's car came up the bank toward him. The way he explained that move was clear and nothing fancy. There were too many times when the group tried the inside line against Earnhardt, and they knew it never worked. Going outside wasn't a risk or a brave thing to do. After running against the same stubborn man for years, they learned their lesson. When things went badly in the last few seconds, Schrader was closest to the wall because of that lesson. A sport that had to change quickly. In the weeks after the crash, American racing went through one of the most intense times of change ever. Investigators looked into every aspect, from how the concrete wall was built to how Earnhardt's seatbelt had broken during the crash. The race team and the company that makes belts got into a public fight. That is, one side points at the other. Fans were so angry at the founder of the safety equipment company that he quit because of all the pressure. They thought he was the only one to blame. Later, reviews from outside sources found that Earnhardt had a long-standing habit of adjusting his belts for comfort, in a way that might have made them less effective in a direct hit. He had also been against newer head and neck safety devices for years, thinking they would get in the way of his driving more than they would protect him. He wasn't the only driver who felt that way at the time. Most people didn't say anything about that trade until it was too late for the one driver who needed it the most. They thought that being uncomfortable behind the wheel was a fair trade for feel and control. An old belt system and no head support made a crash that looked like it could be survived on TV into something the sport had never fully thought about. NASCAR finally released a full investigation report that was over 500 pages long. It broke down the physics of the crash into fractions of a second and listed dozens of factors that played a part. Big changes that changed the sport in just a few years came from that study. At every big track, energy-absorbing walls have been put up. The car's safety frames have been totally redesigned. And a head and neck restraint that quickly became something that every driver on pit road had to have. Schrader saw it all happen from the inside. He was still racing every weekend against the same field, but his competitors didn't know about the memory he was holding. When asked years later how strange the fallout felt, he said it was like when Elvis Presley died and everyone was shocked. A whole culture was shocked and couldn't believe that someone so important could be gone. Still, the next week, the series filled up its haulers and raced again at Rockingham, because that's how the sport works. Hemu said that after that day, nothing ever felt the same again. Over the next few years, all of those changes to safety almost certainly saved lives. Drivers walking away from accidents that would have ended their lives or been much worse with the old gear. Schrader doesn't get much credit in that part of the story because he didn't come up with any of the changes or name any of the technology. But he was there for the crash that changed the sport forever, and he kept racing every form of the car that came after it, the kind of quiet continuity that people from other places rarely notice. After 25 years, the silence finally ends. When Schrader turned 71 in 2026, the sport was celebrating 25 years since that afternoon at Daytona with a new documentary and a wave of retrospectives. He did something he had been putting off for most of his adult life. He did long interviews, some of which were for the Earnhardt family's own media outlets. He talked at length about the friendship, the shop, the amphicar, and then, very carefully, the crash itself. He still hasn't given a clear picture of what he saw that afternoon through that window. It looks like that restraint was planned, not an accident, and not something he forgot to say. Instead, what he's given is everything around it. The choice to tell Waltrip first before anyone else could. The reason he doesn't believe the story about blocking that was told for 25 years. The little things that happened in the friendship's everyday life that had nothing to do with fame or awards. Every little bit of information does more to honor Earnhardt than a graphic story of his last moments ever could. Because of the crash, Dale Earnhardt Jr. has publicly said that Schrader has been like a second, quieter set of parents to him in the years since. He has called him family in every way that counts, even though they are not related by blood. Jr. recently did a podcast about his memories of his father. During one segment, he paid tribute to Schrader for so long that it stopped being a guest piece and began sounding like a thank you letter that was 25 years late. It's that bond that shows what Schrader was like than any quote about the crash itself. That could be how Schrader's 25-year silence really looked. It was never about protecting a secret so shocking it could not be spoken aloud. Protecting a family and their history from having their worst moment turned into a single sentence on a highlight reel was what it was all about. Instead, Schrader let his relationship speak for him. One gravel road, one stubborn fish delivery, and one bad idea shared at a time. He let the little things carry the weight that the crash should never have had to carry on its own. It's an odd kind of loyalty to put comfort over shock value for 25 years in a row in a sport that usually rewards the other idea. Fearsome still has an impact on the sport he created, and drivers who never even shared a garage with him talk about him all the time. They grew up watching his clips instead. But highlight reels, magazine covers, or a single black car with a number on the door don't give the fullest picture of who he was. It comes from the person who was closest to him at the end, bought a stupid car with him, fought with him about fish, and then quietly thought for 25 years about how much of that last moment the world should know. Suppose you had been holding back the hardest thing you had ever seen for 25 years. What would finally make you ready to say it? Thanks for seeing. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel if you like this video. Click on the next video that comes up to see more stories like this. You'll find something new every time.